Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Data Standard Audio Experience. Today on our show, we have Ben Perryman, the Assistant VP of Data Science Delivery at a Fortune 500 insurance company. And today we're going to be speaking about ethical AI, and I'm very excited to learn more about your experiences with ethical AI and your thoughts on this. So welcome to the show, Ben. I'm so excited to speak with you and learn more about your journey.
Thanks so much. I'm excited to be here.
Yeah. Can you go ahead and just introduce yourself?
Sure. My name's Ben. I'm a data science practitioner, AI practitioner for about the past 15 years. I have a doctorate in operations research. Before then, I was a mathematician. In the past 15 years, I've worked on hundreds of data science projects across 4 continents and solved everything from, how do we keep facilities safe in response to changing economic conditions to how do I make you want to buy another gallon of milk at the store. So really any type of problem across the world, I've done probably something at least tangential to it. And during that time, I've kind of started to realize there are common patterns and probably areas that the community could focus more on, which is why recently I've been very focused on responsible AI, ethical artificial intelligence. How do we actually build this technology in a way that works for the betterment of society?
That's great. And everyone knows that ethical AI is something that's very important within the industry. And it's something that people don't put an emphasis on enough within industry level work. And so what are some common issues that you personally have seen that regard AI and just ethical AI?
Sure. And if you look at a lot of the ethical AI discussions, a big part of it is about privacy. So as we're collecting more and more data, the privacy of our citizens is in question. Transparency with respect to a model, especially when it comes to a decision that matters. So if you're letting a computer make a decision for your company or for yourself, how do you ensure that it's being done correctly, and that requires a level of transparency in the model or the design. Manipulation is a big one. So this kind of goes to the transparency idea, but if anybody's watched The Social Dilemma or read about how social media works, greedy algorithms can have the potential to modify what we have as input and go as very tangibly different views of reality, which is often a concern. And then really fairness and bias. So especially with the presence of Black Lives Matters in the US, there's been a renewed focus on ideas like proxy discrimination, systemic bias that shows up in data, and algorithms, because they tend to be unbiased in nature, will pick up on those biases just because they're in the data and then propagate those forward. So how do we responsibly build things, understanding that our past is imperfect, so we can build a more perfect union or a more perfect future?
Yeah, and I think one thing that's very difficult about building AI is that AI, it's often important to be black and white, but also a lot of AI isn't in the gray. I don't know if that makes sense what I'm trying to say, but a lot of times it's like a yes or a no for AI whenever it's like an output or an outcome that you want for your AI. But a lot of times that causes biases, like you had mentioned, and then there's also biases within the data. And so I'm curious, from your experience, all data has biases to some degree, and so that kind of translates into the AI that you build, because you're feeding in the data then that has bias within it. So how do you kind of handle that kind of situation?
I guess there are parts to that question. So the first one is the black and white versus gray idea. So I agree with you. A lot of AI is built, some of AI is built on kind of very binary decisions. And that's sometimes a flagging issue. Sometimes it's natural that we do make binary decisions, so purchase or don't purchase. But I think it's important to note that any decision that's being made by an algorithm is really not, it's not a point estimate, but it's a distribution of confidence, right? So when building algorithms, understanding the level of confidence you have in any prediction helps you to understand what decisions should be made. It is rare that a decision will be based on a point estimate alone. I'll give an example. So let's say you're going to your first job interview, and you have to get there on time, because if you're late for your own job interview, obviously that's bad. I was 5 minutes late for this podcast. I feel horrible, right? If you were an interviewer for me for a job, I'd probably not get the job. So you want to make sure you're there on time. Well, you can say, well, it's 15 minutes to get there according to Google. So I'm going to allocate 15 minutes. Well, if you don't hit the lights right, or if you don't feel comfortable speeding, or there's an unknown crash that happens, there's a decent likelihood that you could show up late. Now, it might only be a minute or two, but there's a decent chance you could show up late if you're only looking at the point estimate, which says 15 minutes. However, if you have a distribution of time on how long it would take to get there, you could say, well, I'm going to allocate 25 minutes so that I have a 99% confidence that I'll get there on time, because this is important to me. And it's not equal if I get there 1 minute late versus 1 minute early. Those two things aren't equal. And so building better metrics and understanding the nature of the distribution and the confidence of a decision has to be key. And I know that some of the audience for this might be students. If there's one thing that you can learn in college, it would probably be point estimates. And this coming from a mathematician who only dealt with point estimates for so long. Point estimates are not enough for the real world.
Yeah, great example there that you have shown, and just finding different measures and metrics to kind of solve these real world problems, definitely. The next question I have has to do with just mitigating these ethical AI challenges. There's a lot of ethical AI challenges and a lot of common ones that you had also mentioned previously throughout this conversation. What are some ways that companies or people have been mitigating these AI challenges from the security standpoint?
Mitigation, I think part of mitigation is just about education. So a lot of challenges with I think with how AI is potentially used right now is that it feels like magic, right? It's in the background, or it's a system that's adopted by a company, and the company might not really understand how that technology works. And as a result, the people that are owning the technology, owning the decisions that the technology solves, they don't have an appropriate understanding of liabilities and limitations. They don't have a true understanding of capabilities, and they might not have a good understanding of how robust the algorithm is. So a lot of times, and if you're a data scientist, you'll kind of know that there's the training, there's the validation set and test set, and you kind of have this data and you portion it up and you build your models and you prove it on your holdout sample that nobody's ever touched before and say, look how good this is. And that works, except for the fact that that's still a moment in time. So I think when COVID came around last year and changed our entire economy and how people operate, it probably destroyed about half the models that people were using, especially that had an external component. Like the model's accuracy fell to near zero because the world shifted in a tangible way. And there was no way, we didn't have enough data to be able to build a model that would be robust enough to handle a 1 in 100 year phenomenon. But there are people that might still be using those models, if not for those that are making the models saying this model is limited in X, Y, and Z way. If these conditions occur, this model will not work. And that's a really important piece of being able to mitigate the risk associated with AI, is giving the users of the AI, the actual owners of the AI, or the owners of the decision, which are ethical or unethical decisions, the knowledge to be able to say, I am not making a well-rationed decision anymore because this AI cannot make a well-rationed decision anymore. That's a really key part of the process. So you need to have that accountability. With that comes continuous monitoring, especially for systems that could adversely affect people. So, if you're monitoring the accuracy of a model through time, and something like COVID happens, and all of a sudden your accuracy drops way low, you can take mitigating steps. You can say, I need to shut off my AI for a while and do it by hand, or you can retrain the model in some cases. So there are ways to mitigate so you make sure that you're still making those decisions responsibly. Doing pre-mortems is probably one of the biggest things that people can do at the start of a project. And pre-mortem, I'm sure everybody's familiar with a post-mortem, which is after somebody dies, you say what happened to them to cause them to die. A pre-mortem is, okay, 6 months from now, somebody died. How did it happen? Or 6 months from now, this AI completely breaks. How did it break? What did it do? And understanding those unanticipated consequences, because you actually think through the problem, can allow you to design in a much more sophisticated way. Final one, and I swear I have a list, but I'll go with the final one. Don't use simple metrics just because you're lazy. So if you design a piece of technology based on trying to finish a transaction in the quickest amount of time, or trying to maximize profit, or trying to maximize revenue, you can get into highly unethical situations if you let AI run. Because unless you box in the AI in the right way, or you set metrics that have socially conscious parts to it, if you don't include that stuff, then it can create bad decisions. And once you get a solution and you showcase that big number on the screen, here's the profit you can get, people care a lot less about the decisions that are going to get them to that profit line because it's already in people's heads. So you really want to think about this beforehand.
Yeah, definitely great insight with everything that you had just mentioned, especially from the security standpoint. Definitely important to kind of mitigate these challenges, these common challenges that people are having with ethical AI. And so one of my last questions is, do you think that schools should be really emphasizing ethical AI at the university level? Do you think that maybe people aren't aware of it enough, the importance of it? What are your thoughts on that?
I think there's not enough focus on it currently. I think some programs get it right. So I'm going to expand AI to its kind of original 1950s, 1960s definition of computers doing what humans did. But there are some groups that really get it right. If you think about actuaries, which are kind of like the data scientists of insurance, they have a society of actuaries that train and test and certify you to make sure that your capabilities are strong enough. They teach ethics, and more so, they give an actuarial code of conduct, which is similar to the Hippocratic Oath or the oaths and regulations that lawyers take, these professional society codes. And the code basically breaks down things like, I want to have some level of capability and make sure that I'm actually competent at what I'm doing. I have the ability to say no to something if I find that it goes against my professional ethos or my professional code of conduct. I'm going to do the right thing. If I have a disagreement with other people, there are some ways to escalate that and have a conversation about it. And it's my responsibility to call people out if I think something's awry. So that code of conduct and ethos on top of it, or ethics on top of it, taught at school, I think is something that currently is missing. When I went through my mathematics programs, my operations research programs, I took philosophy for a lot of my extracurricular courses and ethics extracurricular because I wanted to learn that stuff because it's important to some level, but it wasn't required. You might get a business ethics course if you're going through an MBA program, but they really should double down on how to make decisions beyond just here's how to teach somebody optimization theory. You're making a decision by optimizing on some metric, right? I think also data scientists, it's their responsibility to be heard and be part of that conversation on the ethical use of their technology. And that's, I think by teaching that early on and teaching the implications of such a powerful technology can be very helpful to a student who's about to graduate and go out to the real world where ethical questions are an everyday thing.
Yeah, absolutely. And I completely agree with you. At the university level, there should be just more education on this for the younger generation of data enthusiasts and data thought leaders going into the workplace. So definitely agree with you there.
You're currently in school, or are you out?
Yeah, I'm in my final year right now of university. So we currently don't have a specific course for ethical AI, but we have kind of like a chapter or so, or a segment of it that we do learn, but it's not an entire course. So it's not completely emphasized, the importance of it. I think a lot of students kind of brush it off, kind of. So I think it's important to really understand the importance of ethical AI, definitely, before going into the work field.
Let me ask another question about that. Do you feel that people brush it off because they don't have context?
I think students brush it off because they want to emphasize more on learning the technical aspects of data science. So learning the coding side, the hard skills. That's what they're more interested in. That's what they went into the field for. I think that's what students are more focused on, that, and not emphasizing enough on the ethical AI side.
I can see that. Don't get me wrong.
Yeah.
It's very hard to learn soft skills in the classroom. It's very hard to learn hard skills in in the workplace sometimes, right? I think there's naturally myths. You see some of these programs where they have case studies or other things like that, so you can really get into the weeds of how it is in the real world, as well as teaching material relevant to those case studies, which I wish they would do more of. I will say on that topic, every time that somebody learns something in college, it should not be for the test on Friday. I think a lot of times you get these tests in these classes, and it's very much so kind of what is the test on? What's on chapters 1 and 2? What is the next test on 3 and 4? And because we break things down into these very siloed buckets, we don't get to the point of ethical discussions. But that's something we have to bridge that gap across all chapters and across all courses to get into what actually creates value. I think that the value statement is probably the biggest thing. I have been thinking about this idea recently, but if you think about what metrics make a good data science project, it's not AUC, MAPE, MAE, R squared, or any of those other optimization metrics for the algorithm, right? The metrics that matter are number of users using the technology continuously. So adoption rates. It's customer satisfaction scores. It's all in the business world. We have to or in the real world. We have to understand that our technology is simplification of the real world. And while it's great to learn the newest algorithm, or learn, when to use an XGBoost versus, random forest versus moving average, that's great, but that's not what creates value. What creates value is the correct and responsible adoption of the technology that creates better decisions. And the R squared and the AUC, or whatever metric you're measuring on, whatever hard skills you're doing, it's a very small part of that process. You need to know all the stuff around it as well. And ethical decision making is one of those things.
Yeah, I completely agree. There's a lot of different moving parts and aspects to being a data professional, knowing the business side, knowing the soft skills, and knowing the ethical AI side as well, in addition to your technical hard skills. So completely agree with you there. Great insight. And I wanted to say thank you so much, Ben, for being on the show today. It was so great to speak with you. Pleasure to have you. For more information on the data standard, you can find us at www.datastandard.io, and also on our YouTube and LinkedIn page. So thank you so much, Ben, for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.